We're in the Label and TextBox Controls Demos form that we saw from the previous demo. Let's take a look at what the text boxes on this form do. Well, the first thing is that regardless of what control has the focus, when we move to the next customer, the company name always gets the focus. And that's going to be handled right here. In the code that runs when we move from customer to customer, this code calls the focus method of the company name text box, and that moves the focus into that text box. Okay, what else is happening? Well, let's move to a country that's currently in lowercase. If I click in here and then click out of there, notice that the text changes to uppercase. Let's come back in here. Now I can scroll around and look for that code, but maybe the easier way to do that is to select country text box from there, and then I can see all of the methods here, and the ones that are in bold have text in them, so that's a little bit quicker than scrolling around. So the leave event occurs when the focus leaves the text box, and then what I'm going to do is take the contents of the text property, convert them to uppercase, and then replace the contents of the text box with that. So that just converts whatever's in there to uppercase. We have a couple controls on here that are doing some validation. The first is the notes text box, and I'd like to suggest to the users that they don't enter long text. So in the leave of this text box, I want to know how much text they entered. So to do that, I'll use the text length property of that text box, and if it's greater than 100, then I'm going to display a message telling them how many characters they entered. Please keep it under 100. But I'm not going to prevent them from doing that. I just want to suggest to them. However, the city text box does enforce a rule, and that is that the city can't be greater than 15 characters. So if I type city of Stockholm and try to tab off, then I get this error message, and also I can't leave that field until I either enter a city with less than 15 characters or undo what I just did. Now I can leave there. So let's see how that's done. That's the city text box, and in the validating, I'm going to run this code. Now the leave occurs when you leave a text box. The validating occurs as you try to leave the text box. And the validating event takes as its second argument an instance of the cancel event args class. And that's represented by E. This cancel event args class is nice because it has a cancel property. And if you set that property to true, then the event is canceled. And that event is represented by the attempt to leave the text box. So if the length of whatever's entered into the city text box is greater than 15, I put up the message, and then I set the cancel to true, and the user can't leave. I can also use color to show the user what control they're on. So for example, when I move into the contact name, I'm going to change the background color to yellow, and then when I leave, I'll set it back. I'm going to use two events for that. The enter occurs when I move into that control, and the leave occurs as I leave. So when the focus moves into that control, I'm going to take the back color property and store it somewhere. Now I could use a variable, but if I wanted to do this for every text box, I'd wind up with a variable for each of the text boxes. So rather than that, I'm going to use the tag property of the text box. So I'll take the contents of the back color property and store it to the tag on that text box, and then set the back color to yellow. And then when I leave, I'm going to set it back. Now the tag property is an object, so I'm going to need to cast that object to a color so that I can set the back color. Okay, I also have the ability to copy and paste text, so I'm going to highlight everything in here, and I'm going to copy it, and then paste it into the Notes text box by selecting Edit Paste. I'm going to do that. Let's look at the Copy Tool Strip menu item. There's a copy, there's a cut, there's a paste, there's a number of these. And when I select Edit Copy, this code runs. Well, the first thing I need to know is, are we in a text box? Because if we're on any other control, then we're not going to copy text. So I'm going to use the active control property of the form and see if that's a text box. So if type of me.activeControl is text box, then I'm going to copy, but only if there's selected text. Now me.activeControl is an object, so if I cast that to a text box, then I can use the selection length property, which will return how much text is selected. If that's greater than 0, then I'm going to copy the contents of that text box. Or if I want to cut, I'll call the cut method, and if I want to paste, I'll call the paste method, and I can also undo. Okay, the last thing I want to look at with text boxes is auto-completion. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open up the practice form that we created in the previous demo, and I'm going to add a text box to this form, and this text box is going to display states. And I want to provide the user some help in selecting a state from a list. So the first thing I'm going to do on this text box is set the autocomplete mode property. Let's resize these so I can see. I'm going to set the autocomplete mode property. By default, it's off. If I select suggest, then the text box will display likely values in a drop-down list. If I select append, then the text box will automatically fill out the rest of the text box based on likely values. So I'll select append. Now where is this list that the text box going to use coming from? Well, I'm going to specify that using the Autocomplete Source property. There are a number of choices in here. I want to create a list, so I'll select Custom Source. Then I'll click the ellipsis next to the Autocomplete Custom Source property, and I can enter the list, which is going to be states. Washington, Oregon, Idaho, California. Then I'll click OK. All right, last thing I'm going to do is go to the project properties, go to application, and instead of starting the switchboard, I want to start the practice form when I run this application. So now we'll run this. And now when I come into the text box and I type W, notice that it's automatically completed. Or if I were to type I, that's automatically completed because I chose append. Now what I can also do on this form for the autocomplete mode property is set this to suggest. And now when I run this, when I enter W, likely values appear in a drop-down list. So what you've seen in this demo are techniques you can use to help users enter data into text boxes on forms.